No, this video just talks about the importance of characters in developing a story and examples of some characters that have made a difference and some who have not made a difference and why that's a thing when it comes to writing. Alright, so characters make a difference. I honestly believe if a reader does not care about a character, they will most likely not care what happens to them. If we go to a movie or read a book and a character is killed or something terrible happens to them and we don't really particularly care about that character, not saying that we have to like them. Caring is not the same as liking. But if we have no emotional attachment or no emotional investment in a character, then all the crazy twists and turns can happen, but it may not make a difference. So let's look at some characters who have made a difference and some who have not. Samwise Gamgee. Although that Frodo Baggins is supposedly the main protagonist in the Lord of the Rings trilogy, some would argue that's really about Sam, and he is the one that is most empathetic to the audience, almost a character that you really want to see do well. He's likable, he's devoted, he's got depth to him. He's a gardener, yet he shows a lot of I want to say pride, I want to say courage for someone who has stepped out of his comfort zone. Now compare the idea of Samwise Gamgee to when you look at the Hobbit series that were filmed afterwards to this character. Okay, really, does anyone know who this guy character is? You know he's one of the dwarves from the Hobbit. Can you name him? Do you really know anything about him? Do you particularly care if anything happens to him? I remember when I watched the Hobbit series, I'm just kind of like, who are all these? And then I think one of the one of the dwarfs ends up dying, and I'm like, oh, that's too bad, but do I really care? Because I really didn't have an emotional investment. Not that I'm heartless, but it's an example of maybe too many characters, and even though there was a visual distinction, there was not enough about the characters really to give them any sort of depth. Okay, well, let's talk about some other characters that have made a difference. Anne from Anne of Green Gables. This is such an iconic character that it has had a huge impact on many people and influenced many places. There's been several miniseries and movies made about Anne of Green Gables, and as a little side personal note, my youngest daughter is actually named Anne with an E for that very reason. So it is a fiery redhead who basically came into a place where it was a brother and sister who was running a farm who needed some help, and they wanted to get an orphan, and they wanted a boy, but they got a girl, and it turns out that was one of the best things that ever happened to both Anne and the brother and sister and the surrounding community, because Anne was just such a revelation and a light and such a defining character. Another character who is considered a villain but still has had a major positive impact in the world, I guess, would be Darth Vader. This was a character who was scary and feared, but over the course of the episodes 4, 5, and 6, we kind of see his arc and get to know more about him. We learn a lot more about him in episodes 1 through 3. Really are devoted just to this bad character. I mean, think about it. He is the antagonist, yet he is one of the most iconic characters in all of the Star Wars legends. People care about him, in a way that was, beyond more. So you think about any other villains that just stand out as far as being so iconic, it's hard to say, because he had more depth to him, and that developed over time in the series. And on a personal note, in my first book, The Hidden Sun, the antagonist, his name is Abercan, and he is what's fascinating is in the first book of the series, he's the bad guy, and it was amazing how many people posted reviews and sent me emails and stuff like this, how much they absolutely hated this character. They just despised him. He was just a terrible person. And it was good because they showed that they cared about him, and a little bit of a spoiler alert: he does not die. Abercan does not die in the Hidden Sun. He does get kind of his comeuppance, as it were, but he does not die. and there was such an outcry of just how much people just didn't like him that I had no intention of bringing him back for the second book, but I actually added a subplot, um, which actually ended up making the second book, with the Waxing Moon, much stronger by having a subplot that dealt with Abercan. So that just shows the power of a strong villain who people really dislike. Okay, now let's take a look at some of the archetypes when it comes to different types of characters in a book. Well, you have the hero. And you think of heroes, you think of, for example, Harry Potter, and even, from the Harry Potter series, and then Katniss Everdeen from the Hunger Games series. Basically, they're the ones who, have to save the day, and they're the ones you cheer for as they go through different trials. Then you have the mentor, someone who's going to help the hero along the way. Examples of this would be Gandalf, as he helps Bilbo and Frodo and others do their different quests. And then Obi-Wan Kenobi from the Star Wars thing. He's basically Gandalf in Star Wars. He's the old wizard, as it were, that is mentoring Luke through the first released Star Wars movie. Then you have the everyman, the person that we can all relate to as an audience member. Dr. Watson from the Sherlock Holmes. He's a smart individual, but not nearly as smart as Sherlock Holmes, and so Watson kind of sees the world through every man's eyes, and so that gives the author an opportunity to have Sherlock Holmes explain things to Watson, therefore explaining things to the audience. Another one maybe people aren't familiar with is Arthur Dent. Arthur Dent is from the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. He is from Earth, and he basically goes on this amazing adventure, as it were, throughout the cosmos, dealing with all sorts of alien races and all sorts of crazy, wild elements. But because Arthur Dent is just an everyman from Earth, we as the reader can relate to him and his confusion and his wonder of the things that go on around him. Then you have the innocent, people who play a minor role, but an important role. Tiny Tim in A Christmas Carol, who, and actually it was very interesting how Dickens picked the name Tiny Tim. Not only is there alliteration, but Tim is like a small thing, and Tiny Tim almost, it's a brilliant way of coming up with a name. And then Prim from the Hunger Games series. Again, basically these are folks that are, put in bad situations, no fault of their own, and it gives you the chance to, as a reader, to have empathy, or at least sympathy for them. And you want to see them, come out on top and do well, just simply because they've done nothing wrong and they don't deserve the fate that's been handed to them. And then last but not least is the villain. Okay. Now, it's important to understand, the big examples we have here are Sauron from The Lord of the Rings, who basically just is, the power-hungry ruler who wants to, rule them all, as it were. And then you have the White Witch from the Chronicles of Narnia. Again, the prototypical villain, just wants to be in control, wants things their way. Now, one thing to avoid in any of these archetypes is that they are too much, there's no depth to them. That would be a problem. Villains are not evil just for the sake of being evil. Okay, they honestly, most of the time, believe they are doing what they think is right, or at least what's right for them. So, that anything that's going to make the archetypes have a little more depth, a flaw, as it were, or maybe not as just one-dimensional, will make the character even stronger. So those are some things to think about. Now, how do we do this? I would strongly recommend you think of the characters are real people. There you go. Not just a signpost, which advances the plot. I use video games as this thing. In video games, you have these non-player characters where you go up to them and they kind of repeat the same thing every single time. They're not real people. They're just signposts, really. They just, give you, exposition to move on to the next part of the story. Well, that is, it's like, they're just there all the time. There's no depth to them. They play a role, but not a very important role. So an important thing is realize, even characters who are there just as, minor characters, they're still real people. and they need to be able to have more than just a passing, like I said, if you can just replace them with a signpost that says, "Here is the information the protagonist needs," and then move on, then you've kind of missed out on an opportunity to create a character. So some things to think about when it comes to character. Now, look for those when you're reading in your writings, and have fun with it.